The 2022 NFL draft class is 3 years into their careers, and in today's video we will be going back and grading the first half of the first round of the 2022 draft, which is picks 1 through 16. This is the 5th draft grade video of the series, as we have now graded both the 2023 and 2024 draft classes entirely, and now we are on to 2022. This class only had one quarterback selected in the first 2 rounds, which was Kenny Pickett to the Steelers, and even despite not having a truly great quarterback prospect, this class was really talented, and I think you'll see that in today's video. We will be going in reverse order, so we will be starting with the Commanders' selection of receiver Jahan Dotson, and finishing with the Jags' selection of pass rusher Travon Walker. And we all know why we're here, so without further ado, let's begin. Jahan Dotson was the 16th pick in the first round back in 2022, and I didn't like this pick from the beginning, not because I didn't like Dotson as a prospect, but because I didn't like how the Commanders went about this selection. They had the 11th pick and then traded back with New Orleans, who traded up to go get Chris Olave, and Washington traded back only to draft an inferior player at the same position, and having a duo of Chris Olave and Terry McLaurin would be a lot better than what they currently have, and I thought this long before Jahan Dotson became an Eagle. During Dotson's time in Washington, he had 1,041 yards in 2 years and had 11 total touchdowns as a first-round pick. The production wasn't good, and there was a reason they were willing to move on from him prior to the 2024 season starting. Admittedly, I was soured on this pick from the start, but his career high in receiving yards is just 523, and his career high in receptions is just 49. I wish the best for Jahan Dotson moving forward, but it is important to know we are grading the Washington part of this selection. He wasn't an all-time bust by any means, but this pick was disappointing, and 3 years later, this pick gets a D. Guard Kenyon Green was the Texans' second first-round pick of the night, and Kenyon struggled back in 2022, and I was hoping that 2022 would prove to be a transition period for him because he was a 21-year-old rookie at the time. We've brought up countless times on the channel that there is a major difference between playing collegiate linemen every Saturday and playing grown men on Sundays, both from a strength profile and from a technique profile. I was hoping Kenyon could right the ship in 2023, but unfortunately he suffered a shoulder injury in the final preseason game of 2023 and missed the entire year. So pretty quickly, 2024 became a now or never year for him, and he did not play well. He was a big part of the Texans' interior offensive line struggling, and he allowed 5 sacks in 2024, unlimited pass blocking snaps, and also had 7 penalties. I would be pretty surprised if he makes the 2025 Texans roster at this point, and the only thing that would keep him around is the fact he'll be just 24 at the start of the 25 season, meaning he is still younger than some draft prospects this year. I wish Kenyon the best, but 3 years later, this is an F. Kyle Hamilton was one of the best prospects in the 2022 draft and fell to pick 14, where the Ravens gladly took him to be their guy for the next several years. Kyle Hamilton exploded onto the scene in 2023 as he was a first-team All-Pro and helped the Ravens get to the AFC Championship game. There were some questions about his usage throughout the 2024 season, but Hamilton still made the best out of the situation and added another Pro Bowl to his resume as well as a second-team All-Pro. This certainly applies to guys in the 2025 draft, and it applied to Hamilton back in 2022, but he was the definition of draft a good football player and think about the rest later. And the Ravens are one of the best teams year in and year out because of the way they run their franchise. They do exactly that, and this also applies to their other first-round pick from 2022, which was center Tyler Linderbaum. Hamilton was a 21-year-old rookie, and he's going to sign a very large contract extension soon, and I think the best way to describe this pick is pretty simple. Good franchise drafts good football player, and the results are what you'd expect, an A+ grade. Jordan Davis was the Eagles' first-round pick back in 2022, and there's a few things that need to be noted with this pick. Jordan Davis is never going to rack up the stat sheet and have a 65 pressure 10 sack season, and he's also not going to have a Derrick Brown 2023 type year and break the record for tackles in a single season for defensive tackles. But Davis's presence is felt in the run game, and he got better in 2024. Now, was that worth the 13th overall pick back in 2022? I would say probably not, and I do think the production for the 13th pick in the draft is underwhelming. I don't think he is a complete bust by any means, and I actually think he does his job pretty well for the Birds. He also had a sack in each of the NFC Championship game against Washington and even the Super Bowl against the Chiefs, but is a player that is essentially a rotational defensive tackle who is again good at what he does, certainly not elite by any means, worth that high of a pick? I don't think so, and I would be surprised if the Eagles sign him to a contract extension, and I like Jordan Davis the player, I just don't think Jordan Davis's production equates to the 13th overall pick a few years later. They could have done a lot worse with this pick, but I don't think this is a home run by any means, and this gets a C. Jameson Williams was the Lions' second first-round pick, and Jameson had his breakout year in 2024 as he had his first 1,000-yard receiving season of his career and had an additional 61 rushing yards for a near 1,100 total yard season. JMO is the Merriam-Webster textbook definition of a player who has to be accounted for every single play because he can take the top off the defense on any given play, or like we saw multiple times in the 2024 season, and I think back specifically to the Seattle game, he can take a crosser to the house on any play too. His game speed is absolutely ridiculous, and I was really happy to see him break out in 2024, but this grade specifically is tough because he's only played in 33 of 51 possible career games. I know the ACL tear in the national championship obviously set him back for most of his rookie season, but even in the last 2 years, he's played in 27 of the last 34 regular season games, and 4 of those games were missed due to a gambling suspension. I like Jameson a lot as a player, and I think he is extremely talented, but I can't give him the same grade as a guy like Garrett Wilson, who has nearly 2,000 more receiving yards through 3 years. I do think the talent for Jameson is an A level, and the production will eventually get there, but for now, this pick is a B+. Chris Olave is up, and like his collegiate teammate Garrett Wilson, he started his NFL career off with back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. It was really impressive for Olave to go for over 1,000 yards back in his rookie year when he was being thrown passes from Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton, and while I'm not a Derek Carr fan, I thought Derek Carr was an upgrade from both of those guys entering 2023. Olave went for 1,100 yards, and given he was just 23 years old, looked like a budding star. I think a lot of what's said about Olave also applies to Garrett Wilson, but unfortunately Chris got hurt in 2024 on an absolute hospital ball of hospital balls thrown by Derek Carr, and we're not going to show the play, but unfortunately Olave's season was ended in week 9. Chris is a really good receiver, but he has a history of concussions and unfortunately has not played a full 17-game season since entering the league back in 2022. I think the talent here is an A-level grade, but I have a hard time giving the Olave selection an A grade when unfortunately he can't stay on the field, and I also acknowledge a lot of that is out of his hands. I wish the best for Chris Olave and hope he stays healthy, but 3 years later, this is an A-. Garrett Wilson was the second receiver taken in the 2022 draft and won the Offensive Rookie of the Year as he had 1,103 yards while being thrown passes from guys like Zach Wilson, Mike White, Joe Flacco, and Chris Streveler. He had another 1,000-yard season in 2023, and it was a year of what-ifs for the Jets as their season was over just 4 plays in, as Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles, and that was that. Entering 2024, the expectations were high for Wilson and the Jets, and Wilson himself delivered as he had over 100 receptions for over 1,100 yards and also had 7 touchdowns. His quarterback play improved in 2024 despite how frustrating the Jets season was at times, and his numbers also improved. I honestly feel a little bad for Garrett Wilson because I think he is the textbook example of a player who is extremely talented, yet could put up even better numbers than he already is. I really struggle to grade the receivers in this class because context is key for all of the guys in this class, and I would like to see Garrett Wilson go somewhere where they can truly maximize the player he is, because it's certainly not happening right now in New York. He still has 3 1,000-yard seasons to his name and is a very good player, but I think there's some meat still left on the bone. Through 3 years, this is an A. Charles Cross was the third tackle taken in the top 10 of the 22 draft, and he was a really good pass-protecting prospect coming out of Mississippi State. Cross, like most young offensive linemen, had a transition period in his rookie year, but made nice strides in 2023. He continued his progression in 24, and at just 24 years old, looks like a really good offensive lineman for the Seahawks to extend and to be their left tackle for the next several years. Unfortunately, Cross gets beat more than you'd like despite the truly dominant tape he flashes at times, but given that he is still just 24 years old, I really think the best is yet to come for Charles. He had a Pro Bowl caliber season this past year, and what also should be noted for Cross is the interior offensive line, the guys that play directly next to him, certainly did not do him any favors this past year. He was a very bright spot on a pretty bad offensive line, and for him to still make strides, to me, is a great sign of things to come. I know statistically Charles gave up a lot of pressures in 2024, but the tape was overwhelmingly good, and I think it's only a matter of time until the Seahawks and Cross work out a second contract, an A- grade. Drake London is up, and Drake had the same issue for the first 2 years of his career that Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson have had really throughout their entire first 3 years, and that's not good quarterback play. London finally had better quarterback play in 2024 as the Falcons quarterbacks cumulatively threw for over 4,000 yards in 2024 relative to the 3,500 they threw for in 2023 and the 2,700 yards they threw for in 2022. Not surprisingly, Drake's numbers went up and he went for 1,000 yards for the first time in his career as he had a 100 catch, 1,200 yard year in 2024. He had 3 100 plus yard games this past year, including 2 150 plus yard games, and he is still a very young player as he will only turn 24 in July. The top 4 receivers in this class are all very good, and specifically with the top 3, mainly because Jameson Williams quarterback Jared Goff is a lot better than what the other guys have dealt with for most of their careers. Well, it was a matter of seeing them get to play with a good quarterback. I hope Michael Penix is the guy in Atlanta because I don't think it's unreasonable for Drake to be a 6 or 7 time 1,000 yard receiver if he stays healthy. He's a very talented player, and I think we're just scraping the surface of the player he can be, an A grade. Evan Neal was the Giants' second first-round pick of the night, and unfortunately for the Giants, Evan Neal didn't work out. He was a really solid prospect coming out of Alabama, and the hope was that him and Andrew Thomas would be a great tackle duo of the future, especially after Thomas himself struggled as a rookie back in 2020. Neal allowed 7 sacks as a rookie in 2022, and given he was 22 years old at the time, it was kind of dismissed after his rookie season that he had a bad year. Now, it was obviously something to note, but the general thought was, hey, we just went through this 2 years ago, let Andrew and everyone work with Evan in the building and it'll all work out. But it didn't. In 1,076 career pass blocking snaps, Neal was allowed 85 pressures, has committed 18 penalties, and has also allowed 11 sacks. The most notable point in his career was him responding to the critics saying, "The person commenting on my performance, what does he do? Flip hot dogs and hamburgers?" And unfortunately, that summarizes this draft pick 3 years later. Not surprisingly, this grade is an F. Ikem Ekwonu was the Panthers' first-round pick, and through 3 years, Ekwonu has been really up and down as the Panthers' left tackle. He is a really good run-blocking tackle, and I'll be honest, I really think a team should call Carolina and see what it would cost to bring him in, because he has good guard capabilities, and I think he would be maximized there. He struggles at times with speed rushers, and that's evident on tape, but there's also games where Ekwonu plays at a pretty high level, and I think he has improved year after year since being drafted back in 2022. But the problem, if you will, is I don't think he'll ever be a premier left tackle to the point where you're having top 4 or 5 left tackle discussions and automatically bring his name up. Ekwonu's not bad by any means, but he's committed 37 penalties since being drafted and has also allowed 24 sacks. For the good 4 or 5 game span Ekwonu has throughout each year, there's always a few games where he gets absolutely gashed in pass protection. I understand everyone has bad games, as not every quarterback is going to throw for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns, and likewise, not every tackle is going to pitch a shutout every week, but the lows are a lot lower than you'd like. Ikem had a C+ through 2 years, and it's the same C+ through 3 years. Kayvon Thibodeaux is up, and this is a tricky player to grade because I don't think it's as simple as looking at his numbers, and more specifically his sack numbers, given that he has 21 career sacks, and think he's even close to the player Travon Walker or Aidan Hutchinson are, despite Travon only having 3 more sacks in his career, and Hutch only having 7.5 more sacks in his career. Now, Hutch missed a lot of time in 2024, and we'll get to him in a minute, but I think it's fair to say Thibodeaux has been a disappointing player since being drafted number 5 overall 3 years ago. Thibodeaux fans will point to the 11.5 sack season he had in 2023, while not acknowledging he had just 43 pressures on 520 pass rushing snaps, which isn't good. Now, Thibodeaux did miss 5 games in 2024, but I don't think that factors in much to who he is as a player at this point in his career. 2.5 of Thibodeaux's 5.5 sacks in 2024 were in weeks 17 and 18 against the Colts, who are a non-playoff team, and the Eagles' backups in week 18. He isn't consistent, and I also think there's times where he doesn't look the part of being an NFL defensive end. He's not a complete bust, but to select him in the top 5 and question regularly what player you're going to get on Sunday isn't a good situation to have. And 3 years later, this is a C. Sauce Gardner is up, and despite everything the Jets have not done right over the last several years, the 2022 draft was not one of them, because they absolutely nailed the 2022 draft, and it started with their first two picks, as Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson were each named Rookie of the Year. Now, I know Sauce Gardner had a bit of a down year in 2024 relative to the seasons he had in each of his first 2 years, but he still had a pretty solid season, all things considered. He was credited with allowing a single touchdown, and through the first 3 years of his career, he has only allowed 1 touchdown in each season. Sauce having a quote-unquote down year in 2024 was notable because of each of the first 2 seasons he had, and more specifically his rookie year, in which he had 20 pass deflections, 2 interceptions, and was locking receivers up left and right. He had more penalties in 2024 than he did in each of his first 2 years, but I'm not going to bring this grade down when a team selects a 2-time first-team All-Pro with their first-round pick, because that's exactly what the goal is. And if you would ask anybody if they could draft a player who would go on to have 2 first-team All-Pros in 2 of their first 3 years, you know what the answer would be. And this grade does not change from where it was even back midway through his rookie year. This is an A+. Stingley Jr. of the Texans is up, and he was their first of 2 first-round picks on the night, and believe it or not, there was a point in time where there were questions about the Stingley selection, and that kind of summarizes the pre-D'Amico Ryans era. 2022 was tough for the Texans, and they had their number 3 overall pick in a non-scheme fit, and Stingley didn't play well in his rookie year due in large part to that. Not surprisingly, he stepped up his game in a big way in 2023, as he had 5 interceptions and even had 13 pass deflections, and looked like a much better player. He played the 2024 season at just 23 years old and took his game to another level this past year, and had another 5 interception season, and was named a first-team All-Pro. He also had 18 pass deflections, which is downright insane, and Stingley and Kamari Lassiter are really good corners for the Texans and look to be for some time. There was a low point where the Texans were legitimately questioned about not taking Sauce Gardner over Stingley, but they trusted the process and things turned out good for them. This franchise trajectory is headed up, and the Stingley pick gets an A+. Aidan Hutchinson, the Michigan man, is up, and through 3 years, Hutch has 28.5 sacks and has been a tremendous player for the Lions. Hutch had 53 pressures as a rookie back in 2022 and nearly doubled it in 2023 as he had 101 pressures and was named to the Pro Bowl. His 101 pressures were second in the NFL to Micah Parsons' 103, and he was off to a scorching hot start in 2024 as he had 45 pressures in just 4.5 games before fracturing both his tibia and fibula in a game against the Cowboys. I personally think Hutch was well on his way to winning Defensive Player of the Year in 2024, and at the time he was hurt, he was leading the NFL in pressures by a laughable amount, as in by double digits in just week 6. He still had 7.5 sacks this year and even had 17 quarterback hits before he got hurt, and he is a franchise cornerstone. He is a part of the legendary run of Lions first-round picks that helped them get back to where they are today, and that's a serious contender year in and year out. He is almost certainly going to get paid within the next year or so, and the only question GM Brad Holmes will ask when the time comes to Hutch's agent is how much. Hutch is a game changer, and 3 years later, this is an A+. Travon Walker was the number 1 pick in the 2022 draft, and there was a lot of controversy around this pick because Aidan Hutchinson was viewed as a better prospect. Now, while that is true, there can be some misconception around this pick at times, and especially because of the team success the Lions have had over the past few years. Travon Walker is a really good football player, and believe it or not, he is working on back-to-back 55-plus pressure, double-digit sack seasons, and will be 24 for most of the 2025 season. Sure, he's not the player Hutch has been since being drafted, but to be fair, Hutch took his game to a whole other level since being drafted number 2 overall. But Travon Walker is a player a lot of teams wish they had, and a guy who has gradually gotten better since entering the league. Admittedly, I had a lot of concerns about this pick when it was made, as everyone did, but the reality is, Travon Walker should be extended in Jacksonville and should play there for 7 or 8 years if he stays healthy, maybe even longer. Now, is this true number 1 overall pick franchise-changing production? No, but this is still a solid number 1 overall pick, and 3 years later, this is an A-. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel tremendously, and I cannot thank you guys enough for the support. Until next time, as always, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.